Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're just going to give it another minute or two to let a few more people jump in. We'll be getting started shortly. For those of you that just joined, we're just giving it another minute or two to let some last minute folks jump in, but we'll be getting started shortly here. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. We have a very exciting webinar planned for you. My name is Arun. I'm a solutions engineer and account manager at SciNote. Some of you may recognize me or may have worked with me before. But more importantly, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Tess. So I'm going to hand it over to Tess to introduce herself and the topic, and we'll dive right in.
Great. Thank you, Arun. So I'm Tess. I'll introduce myself a little bit more as we go through the webinar. But the talk is all about designing data strategy in the lab, how governance, culture, and connected systems enable science. So I want to start with a little bit of a hypothetical situation of what a startup looks like when we don't have a data strategy. So in the beginning, it's always really exciting when you start your lab, you get your first employee, the data starts getting generated, and a lot of what you record is based on the scientist or the researcher that is hired. So if we don't have a data strategy in place, we start having gaps in our metadata. We're not necessarily recording everything that we need if we're not thinking far enough ahead into the future. As you move on and your lab begins to mature, perhaps you get a dry lab scientist or additional wet lab scientist. And we start to have frictions because different perspectives come into play. And so as we get those frictions, we start to have collaboration falter. And this can create a number of issues again as we're going down. As we continue to mature, we're generating a lot of samples. We need to have a freezer inventory. We need to have IDs that are consistent across the lab. And if we don't sit down and have those discussions, then we start generating data that is directionless. As we continue to build the lab, you might have teams of scientists, each working either within the same project or within different projects. But we might end up with some language drift. Not everyone's using the same language or meaning the same thing when they're using words. And I have a little anecdote about that and how we can fix that a little later in the webinar. And then finally, as your lab continues to mature, if nothing happens, you have all this friction, you have the language drift, you're going to start having a lot of people who are frustrated, not understanding where their lanes are, what their responsibilities are, and how they interact or collaborate with other members in the team. And they may leave. And when they leave, you get data loss or you lose the value of the data. Things become orphaned. They stay on people's computers. They stay in lab notebooks that many people aren't able to read. And this can have a number of impact on your data going down the line. So what if we pretend instead that the data strategy came first, that is built in parallel with our business and scientific strategy, and is built with the same integrity and rigor that we have with those other two strategies, not making data strategy the duct tape over these broken systems, or trying to fix something that the data strategy never was intended to fix. So, hi, I'm Tess. I am a microbiologist by heart, but also did 3 years as a data strategist and built systems, pipelines, and infrastructure at a startup. I have a PhD in genetics, genomics, and bioinformatics, and a data strategy certificate from UC Berkeley. I also have been a SciNote user for 3 years, and so I have a lot of hands-on practice using the platform of SciNote. In addition to doing public talks, I am also a consultant on data strategy or pipeline design for bioinformatics, and also do science communication as well. So if any of that is of interest to you, or these are any pain points that you have, I'd love to continue a conversation and see how I might be able to assist you or your company in developing in any of these areas. So the webinar is in 5 parts today. We have why build a data strategy in parallel, which we've talked a little bit about already. What is a data strategy? How do decisions shape data strategy? Who owns governance and culture? And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I think without culture, we cannot implement any of our strategies. So it becomes vitally important. And then we'll end the webinar talking about what can you do tomorrow, today, tomorrow, in the future to start implementing any of these ideas that you find in the webinar. And the goal, of course, of your data strategy is to create a trusted, connected, decision-ready system for people and AI. And I'll just say at this point, AI strategy is part of data strategy. I think when AI first came out, people were trying to separate them. But it encompasses so much that now your data strategy really incorporates that AI strategy. And we'll talk about how AI is incorporated throughout the talk. So we talked a little bit of what happens when your data strategy is not built as your lab matures. So let's transition into talking what can change when strategy is built in parallel. The first great thing that can happen when we start developing our data strategy is we're building for scale. We're not building for your lab of today, but we're building for the lab of the future. So we're understanding what metadata we need to collect, not just today, but to do analysis 6 months or a year from now. We can also start incorporating integrity. We know what our IP policies are. We know what our AI policies are. And this sets standards across the company. Another thing that happens, so when we were talking about what happens when you don't have a data strategy, a lot of the issues came from alignment and collaboration. So when we have a data strategy in place, we're better able to assign roles and understand where each person fits and how they connect in a network throughout your company. And of course, when we have our data strategy, we can build our data to be AI ready. So data is ready for the models that you want. Data strategy is what turns raw data into usable value. So what do I mean by that? On the left here of the slide, we have the reality of most scientific and technical organizations. Data comes from everywhere. You have samples, you have instrument data, you have experiments that you're running. You might have omics data or assays that come from third parties, and all the external data that you might be collecting. At this point, the data doesn't really have value. It's just stored somewhere. And well, hopefully it's stored somewhere. But we're not getting to the value, which is our outcomes and impacts that we always want to see. And these are our dashboards, our data driven decisions, our analysis that we might be doing. And so this middle portion is really where your data strategy comes in. It's your standards, your governance policies, your security and privacy, your logs and accessibility goes in here. Roles and ownership is also part of your data strategy. And I'll also note that within this little middle portion, we also have other elements than just your data strategy, such as your protocols, your SOPs, and the ways that you work within your lab. So moving on into what is data strategy, it should align with business and scientific strategy. And you'll hear me say this throughout the talk because I think sometimes we separate our different strategies, but that really creates silos. We need to braid these things or weave them together so that everything is working towards a common goal. So the data strategy is really that bridge between research and organizational goals. It is a plan for how data creates scientific and business value. It's a set of decisions about ownership, access, and reuse. It is a blueprint. So you can see with all of these words is it's a document that lives alongside your business and your data strategy that helps create better data for use down the line. And it's a foundation for governance, metadata, and trust. And so that portion is really the implementation. And we'll talk about data governance and what that means a little later on in the talk. So Arun, do you want to introduce FAIR data for us?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to take a moment here to talk about the FAIR data principles. This is something that we're very focused on here at SciNote. It's something that I talk through a lot of new customers with when they're implementing SciNote, setting up their data management systems. So I'll just give you a quick overview on what the FAIR data principles are. So FAIR is an acronym that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. They're basically principles on how scientific data should be managed and shared, making it easy for both humans and machines to work with the research data. So we'll go through each of the acronyms very quickly. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide here. But when we say data should be findable, we mean that the data should be easy to search for, easy to locate by both humans and automated systems. So this means you want your data objects to have unique identifiers that you can use to search for, or that you can use an API query to pull the data with. You want the data to have metadata, as in who captured the data, when was it captured, was it modified after it was captured. So these things are essential in making your data findable. And then you also want the data to be accessible. So once the data is found, there should be a standardized way to retrieve the data. And you want this retrieval process to have the required authentication methods because, of course, we want the data to be standardized but not entirely open. So you can put in place authentication methods to make sure that the data is accessible only to those that need to have access to it. And then importantly, the metadata around the actual data that you're retrieving should also be available, even if the data set itself is no longer available. And this is something that is a core part of SciNote. So in SciNote, for some of you that are SciNote users, you may know that when you run a protocol and generate some results, you are able to delete those results, provided you have the right permissions. But the activity log and audit trail is always going to retain information that there was a data set that was captured, and then it was deleted on this date, this time by this user. And then we have interoperable. So you want the data you capture to be able to work with other data sets, other tools, other workflows. And in SciNote, we enable this by allowing you to pull the data out in a variety of ways. So you can export the data manually. You can use SciNote's API to query the data and push it downstream into another tool. So we make sure the data can be used with other data sets for other tools that you may be using as a part of your scientific tech stack. And then lastly, reusable. So the data should be well described enough to be used and replicated in different contexts. This means it's important that you have the initial context behind which the data was captured. So there's a clear and accessible usage. There's the data is associated with detailed provenance. So who created it, how it was created, when it was created. And all of this is very clearly captured in SciNote. And if this is something you'd like to learn more about, we can talk about this offline as well. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to Tess. And actually, sorry, one more note before I do that. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A section to drop any questions that you have along the way. We're going to be taking some time at the end to go through these questions. And back to you, Tess.
Thank you, Arun. So we need to talk about data strategy. A common misconception I hear is that data strategy is just your tools, and it's really more about decisions than the tools. While a tech stack is part of your data strategy, it's only one part. And so what are we making decisions about? We're making decisions about how we are capturing and managing our data. What do you do with the data? Where are you putting it and why? Is it fair, as Arun just talked about? Then we can move into sort of the next pillars. How are we analyzing the data? How do you harness the insight? As we said before, data inherently doesn't have any value until we can start working with it and bring that value out of it. Then we go into delivery. So delivery is really about democratizing the data. Who needs to look at your data? Is what you're making for internal use, or is it something that will be more client facing? And then the final pillar here is governance and security. So who owns it? How is it protected? What are your permissions and log protocols? So while we have tech stacks part of it, I think these four pillars, if you can answer these questions, you're doing pretty well in your data strategy and you've done a lot of work already. So we need to be able to stress test our data strategy or implement our data strategy as we go forward. So we can start developing use cases in order to achieve that. And the first thing you want to look at is, does your use case fit your strategy? So is it aligned with your scientific, business, and data strategy? Does it support the goals that you're trying to achieve in your research? Is the data mature enough to support it? Do you have the right resources in order to implement it? You really want to be able to sit in the intersection and feel comfortable with your strategy. So what are different use cases that you can create? There are 5 different types of use cases that you can create. And it's important when you're in this process of choosing use cases to try to come up with different use cases in each of these. You start with a brainstorming session. You want to make sure that the use case that you have solves a real problem and has clear users. Sometimes, as a data person myself, I get really excited about different data problems. I start creating certain solutions for it. But in the end, the users may not want it, or it's not built for the needs that they have. So it's important when you have these use cases that you're thinking that this is a problem, this is something that people want to see. It is trusted and will increase speed or increase trust overall. So the 5 different types of use cases that we have are new products. So these are things like apps, pipelines, platforms, scientific services. Then we have things like data products, and these are probably the ones that most people are most familiar with. These are your dashboards, reports, and client outputs. Then we have operation efficiencies, and sometimes this one gets missed, but it's one of the most important ones, I would say. So this is about automation and workflow consistency. How can you increase research by hooking up your LCMS to have to automate the data into a cloud system and have it processed automatically and returned back to the users that need to look at it? That sort of efficiency can save weeks in a lab. And then with AI, a lot of knowledge retrieval use cases have come up. This is being able to look at your internal knowledge, all the documents and PowerPoints and policies that are created, to be able to query over them, pull them up quickly, and understand what has already been created so we're not duplicating work. And then the last piece is protecting your assets. This one's also really important. How are you securing your databases? How are you protecting your IP going forward? So strong AI programs start with real decisions. And I think that is something we often forget. There's a lot of hype around AI, and people want to jump right into the methods or the technology. But really, we have to have that real problem, that real question in order to move forward with AI readiness. And finally, with your use cases, so we understood that we sit in the intersection, we did brainstorming, we have all these different use cases now that are going to impact variety of different departments in the company, and we need to choose which ones to focus on first. And so you build an evaluation system, and this evaluation system should include things like how trusted is the data? How much speed are we improving? What is the value of the efficiency that we're trying to create? How do we handing off? Do we have the right things in place to have a handoff between the different people who are operating within this use case? But in addition to these evaluation systems or evaluation topics that I have here, each lab should have their own unique evaluation systems. So you want to, while these are a great start, you also want to think about, again, your data, your scientific strategy, your business strategy, and what is important for the company at that point. And then you can pick one or two high value use cases and then start to implement them. And this is where we can start stress testing our data strategy. In addition, this builds momentum. So oftentimes, if we're starting something new, we need to have some evidence that this is important and this adds value to the company. So by choosing the right use cases, it will build that momentum and provide evidence for people like stakeholders or C-suite that might need a little bit more evidence in order to take this seriously. So the first AI mistake I always see people make is trying to implement before asking that good question. So it's always about asking the question and then deciding what methods and technology are going to best serve that use case that you've decided on. So we have a quick poll here that Arun will introduce. So we're looking for, does your team have a data strategy? And this is just sort of a quick fun thing so we can see where everyone sits.
Awesome. We're getting some nice responses in here. I'll give it another 10 seconds and then we can view the results. All right, we got a lot of votes in here. So let me end the poll and share the results. Tess, are you able to see the poll results?
Yes, I am. And it's so interesting that we have such an even split across people that have a data strategy, are partially implementing, and don't really have one yet. And wherever you sit, it's great to be and have that awareness of how to grow in as you go forward. We're going to dive into data management. So this is one of the most important pillars, I would say, in your data strategy because it happens upstream. It's in the beginning. And if this portion's broken in any way, everything downstream will not work as efficiently as you may want. So the first is architecture. So this is really the data types, the formats, the structures. This is sort of like your city blueprint, if you will, of where you're going to store your data, why, and how. Then we have the concept of ETL. So this is extract, transform, and load. And this is really getting at the data flow. So how is your data traveling from capture into analysis? And what are all the processes that have to happen in between? Then, of course, we have data quality. And this is about ensuring that we have rigor in the way that we're collecting our data. We don't have duplication happening because we have duplication detection set up. And this can be a handoff between AI and humans uh, as well. So we're having humans check things. We can have Machines also checking for duplication or anomaly checks as well. And then we have data analytics. So this is sort of the end point. So there are three different kinds of data analytics. There's sort of the descriptive ones. So this is where you start out. So what did happen? What does your data look like? What is the shape of it? What are you doing with um, any missing data that you might have? Then we have predictive. So that's what will happen. And then prescriptive is the last one. So what should we do? So making those data-driven decisions. And one of the best ways that we can implement data management is through an ELN. So an ELN, an electronic lab notebook, is something that can help you with data management by standardizing capture at the point of work. It's really good at saying this is the kind of data that should be in certain inventories, or this is the sort of codes that we're using or consistency in our IDs. So data management within ELNs can really bring that ambiguity out and ensure that we're speaking in the same language. It also helps with traceability. So a lot of the ELNs, because they're electronic, you're able to access different data and find it usually through a search button. And that allows you to trace certain things and pull up data really quickly. Whereas something like a lab notebook, it can be really hard to organize and to find different data as more and more data is collected. You have that continuity issue is resolved as well when you have ELNs in place. So because you have the ELN, everything is documented in a way that when one employee leaves and the next scientist comes in, they're able to get up to speed relatively quickly because of the documentation that you can store in an ELN. And then, of course, we can have that shared language. We can ensure that everyone's speaking the same way and are aligned in what they are doing. And all of that ends up improving collaboration. I will also say that ELNs often have permissions and access restrictions to ensure that we only people that need to look at the data can see the data, but also the people that need to look at the data can find it and access it relatively quickly. So this is a conceptual data architecture. On the bottom layers here, we have our defense, which is always where we want to start. And then we move into the offensive portion of the architecture. So on the defensive side, the first thing we always are doing is data capture. That data needs to be stored somewhere. So that can be on an on-prem tech stack, or it can be on the cloud as well. And then you also have your external apps like an ELN, like SciNote, that can help you with data capture and management. And then you have the next line, which is really our implementation of our data strategy, right? So we're talking about data engineering, data management, data governance, data quality, and your privacy and security principles as well. After that, as we move into the offensive side, we're wondering how we can query over the data, that interoperability of our fair data that we're trying to achieve. And finally comes the fun part, the part where we're turning it into data-driven decisions. We're turning it into the outcomes that we want. So this is your data science, your real-time analytics, automation, and AI inference. So Arun, do you want to talk a little bit about how SciNote fits into this architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as looking at the conceptual data architecture that Tess just walked us through, so if we're looking at sort of what is the bridge between your data capture and everything else that happens downstream of that, well, Tess already alluded to having an ELN to help bridge that gap, and SciNote is built for purpose to do this. And out of the box, right away, SciNote already has provisions to help with your data management using let's say, role-based access controls on multiple layers, with the governance of your data, with built-in compliance features that already exist, with the quality of your data as well, and then most importantly, the privacy and security of your data. So we have certifications to ensure that the data has been, how we capture data, how we manage the infrastructure is in accordance with certain guidelines. And if you want to learn more about this, we can always chat about this offline. So feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the SciNote team about that. And then on the next slide, we're going to take it a step further and actually look at What does this look like in practice? So if you would like to have the capture of your data, the traceability, and the handoffs all in one system or one platform, what might it look like? So I have some screenshots here directly from the SciNote platform, and this highlights some very specific areas of SciNote. So the first one we have is as a screenshot of an actual inventory. So in SciNote, you can tailor your inventories to manage samples, reagents, instruments, etc. And when you're building out your inventory, you're able to capture all the associated metadata or data points about your samples, reagents, etc. And then when you're actually using these samples and reagents to generate some data, SciNote automatically associates where specific samples or reagents were used and what was the outcome when you used those samples with a particular protocol. And then, of course, the metadata of when was this performed, who performed it, were there any changes after the data was generated. All of this is tracked in a single platform in SciNote. And on the right-hand side, there is a screenshot of how to visually manage locations of your samples. So I keep saying samples because this is, I've run into this when working in the lab myself. When you're working with samples, you want them to be stored in an organized manner, and you want to make it easy for you to find the samples. So if you use a platform like SciNote to map this out visually and then physically store your samples in accordance with where you map them out, it becomes a lot easier to find these samples, to find what samples were fully used up, which boxes are empty, things like that. So everything remains interconnected in a single platform here. And then on the next slide, I have a couple more screenshots that look just past the inventory. So the previous slide, we looked at inventory specific information, but now we're looking at where you're using those samples, reagents, et cetera, to generate your results. So in SciNote, you're able to track the exact workflows where they were used, the exact SOPs or protocols that were used to generate these. And then, of course, the screenshot on the right shows you how you can assign these items to those specific workflows or protocols where you're using them. And the traceability is built into all of these. So from your protocol template section, you can see exactly where your protocols were used. And then from there, you can see what items were used, what results were generated. Or you can start with the inventories and start with a sample and see where a sample was used, what SOP or protocol was used, and what results were generated. So again, bringing everything back into one interconnected system.
Great. So we're going to move into part three of the talk on data governance. And a lot of people think data governance is a lot of bureaucracy. And while it is because we're creating standards and policies, it's also going to be a way of reducing silos within the company, reducing duplication, particularly of work, because now we're more aligned as a company, and reducing risk and having uncertainty reduced as well. So what is data governance? It is a plan that involves both people and implementation. So the plan keeps priorities tied to business and scientific goals. A lot of this is operationalizing data to be fair and sort of operationalizing your data strategy as well. It has strengths and compliance and continuity. So it has plans in place in order to protect your data as you're going forward. On the people side, roles and responsibilities are explicit. People know where they stand on data governance and the data strategy, and they feel empowered by it, which I think is the other really important thing. People need to understand who they go to for different issues, how they work with the different groups or different people within the organization. And I think an important thing about data governance on the people side is it's cross-functional. It involves everybody at some level, but you can create a cross-functional data governance group, which we can talk about in a little bit. And then AI is going to magnify ambiguity when ownership is unclear. So this is something that I think doesn't get talked about quite enough is the human in the loop process. And as we start implementing more and more AI systems, we need to ensure that we have that blended cognition starting to happen. So we're working together with our AI systems. So I have a little anecdote here about a particular issue that occurred in some because data strategy wasn't properly implemented. And so I worked with a couple different scientists. They worked on the same project, but within different teams. And what ended up happening is that the scientists were calling a sample something different while performing similar tasks. So one scientist were like, this bulk sample that we got is the sample that we're using in recording of SciNote and the experiments that we're running. While another scientist said, no, it's the bit of the that we're pulling out from that bulk sample as what we're calling a sample for an experiment. Now, you can imagine that having these two vastly different definitions of samples can have issues downstream in analysis. And so SciNote really helped that group understand where this gap was occurring. And we had to come up with some way of ensuring that we're all speaking the same language, so having that shared language. And what we ended up doing was having an ontology workshop. So ontology is creating that standard language. It helps with consistency and ensures that everybody in the lab has the same level of alignment and understanding of how different words are used within the different teams and projects. Metadata is also a part of this, so we have to ensure that everyone's collecting the same metadata, understanding why that metadata is important to collect, and is naming those fields the same way. And this is what is nice about an inventory, like what SciNote provides, is you're able to sort of lock down some of the language that you're using. You can put in the column name, the units that you're using. You can ensure that on the metadata, people are only if there's only four choices, then they can only choose between those four choices and not handwrite free form in any text that they have. Data architecture, we've talked a little bit about. So this is how it all connects together, your metadata, your ontology, your data capture. And then I just briefly want to touch upon operational metadata. So as scientists, we often think that we're only working with our own metadata, but a lot of data scientists and data strategists are also working across the company. And so you have that business metadata as well. This is your permissions, your logs, your retention in the company. So some data teams focus on that and are part of that, and sometimes it's just the metadata on the science side. So now we get into part 4 of the talk, and this is my favorite part on data culture. This is really trying to reduce frictions between different teams. And a lot of that comes from understanding and communication, and also respect for everybody in the team, and ensuring that everyone understands the different roles and the importance of that. And I think once you get to that point, people feel really empowered about their position and not afraid that they're stepping on toes or not understanding who to go to, right? Reducing that uncertainty in processes and standards that you might have. And so you may or may not heard of this quote by Peter Drucker, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so we have to ensure that our culture is strong or our strategy will not be properly implemented. So I touched upon this a little bit, data governance group being something cross-functional, but every team has a different responsibility in your data strategy and data governance. It really is a company responsibility and not something that should be siloed to just a data team or IT, if you will. So your data team is really the ones operationalizing the standards and pipelines. They're the ones that are often looking at your data analysis, your data science. Maybe they're implementing some AI strategy as well. Then you have your researchers, your bench scientists, which need to be the stewards of context at the bench. And they're really important in the data integrity. And so having enough time in order to have that data integrity, being able to feel empowered that you can take that hour on a Friday afternoon to ensure that everything that got into SciNote at the end of the week is correct is really important. And I often think that managers or people in higher levels in the organization can forget about taking that extra time and allowing that time for researchers to really be able to efficiently implement data integrity. And I also think researchers are really important as well for getting biological context, right? Your data team may be able to throw it through pipelines or process it, but they may not have all of the information to process it in the right way for the biology that you're doing, right? So I think this connection between the data team and researchers needs to be strong and frictionless to have a good data culture. Then you have your commercial team, your sales team. So these are your client facing people. They need to be able to adequately explain the science, um, the graphs that come out, anything that they're showing to clients. They need to be able to talk about it intelligently and with rigor. There are also people that can bring features or different products that clients want into the team so that we can be creating those use cases in ways that best serve the stakeholders and clients within the company. And then, of course, you have C-suite, so they're in charge of setting priorities and resourcing. So then we get into what is a data governance group. It should include members from all of the different departments within your organization. And this can be a group that comes together. They might talk to the different groups that they're different departments they're a part of, come into the data governance groups and bring up those issues for discussion. And that might lead to new use cases or new standards and policies or redirection in priorities that are happening on data strategy. Oftentimes, this group can elevate issues or use cases to C suite to ensure that we're still being aligned with our business and scientific strategy. So technical debt sometimes equals cultural debt. So it's not about the tools that we're using is not correct. Sometimes it's the way that we're creating that data culture within our organizations that creates that friction and really becomes the bottleneck of implementing your data strategy. So how can we avoid this? One is making sure that data integrity is non-negotiable. Everyone has the time to implement data integrity and feels really passionate about making sure that the data that we are capturing can be trusted and reused, right? Those fair principles that we talked about. You also have to make sure that you have the adequate resources. And this can exist both on the tech side, tech stack side, as well as the people. So if you have a really big data project and you don't have the right data people involved, like you just have a bioinformatician, but you have a back-end software development project that you want to do, you have to have the right resources to implement that strategy. And then we talked a lot about team integration, having those clean handoffs, and that's both verbally and within the data handoffs as well. All this starts to create a better AI ready data system that we can trust and have clear use cases for. And then data literacy. So this part can be a lot of fun. These are your lunch and learns that you might have where data teams are showing a specific data product and how to use it. It can be research teams showing graphs that they've created and the data analysis that needs to happen. It can even be commercial teams showing different features that are requested by clients. So there's a lot of different ways that you can improve data literacy within the company. Sometimes it's workshops, sometimes it's more webinar lecture based, and sometimes it's smaller meetings to ensure that everyone really understands the data at the level that they need to. And when we can create all of this, we can have more collaborative, evidence-based, role-aware data decisions, which is really we want to go through. So I've talked about data culture quite a bit here. And so my question is to you is how would you describe your team's data culture at this point?
I've dropped another poll in here. Please feel free to jump in and drop any responses. I'll give it another 10, 15 seconds. Awesome. Got some good responses here and a pretty interesting split compared to the previous poll.
Yeah. Data culture, I think, is one of the hardest things to implement, and sometimes having someone come in as a consultant and kind of walking through people how to improve your data culture can really help in improving this. So I often see that this is not uncommon, that most people don't have a data culture, haven't really thought about it. Sometimes it's just having the thinking about it. You might realize how your data culture is and where the friction exists. So I have one more little anecdote for everybody, and this is on biobanking. So as a microbiologist, biobanking is really important. It's the way that we organize data for our microbes. So we might be collecting certain microbes or in order to understand their function for a specific use case that we have. And this is one workflow with many critical handoffs. So you might be collecting a sample, and that sample may be collected by a third party, by your clients. It could be collected by scientists out in the field, and you got to collect metadata for that. And you might start coming into issues about legally what the company or third party is allowed to collect on metadata. How are you going to address that? What do we do with missing data? After we collect the sample, we might isolate the microbes, including that and ensuring that we have a monoculture so that we can store that into a freezer inventory. And so this is where SciNote comes in again. So we're able to create that freezer inventory, and biobanks often go on for years. So that freezer inventory can get really messy if we're not organized well. Then you might extract the DNA, send it off for sequencing. So now you have a third party involved in that data handoff. You get your sequencing back, and that might go to your data team, your bioinformaticians to be analyzed in some way. And then you can deliver it back to the scientists so they can analyze it and understand it in a more biological context. Now, one thing that I did like about using SciNote is when I created these reports on the bioinformatic reports, I was able to actually upload the reports right into the inventory so that all of the data and sample tracking occurred in one spot and allowed people to easily access and align on all the data for a particular sample. And the other unique thing about SciNote is they have this open API. And what that means is you can connect your SciNote inventories and data and experiments into your cloud infrastructure and architecture. And this allows you to create sort of connected dashboards that are going to pull in the bioinformatics data and your sample metadata and all your experimental data. So you can create this dashboard that really is integrating all of this different data that we're creating. So this is my one slide on AI readiness. So AI readiness is really upstream work. You need to have the clear use cases. So identify the problem first and then move into the methods that might be used. And AI doesn't solve every problem, but it can solve a lot of problems these days. You have to ensure that your data is trusted, right? So AI is great at summarizing, classifying, retrieving data, but if you can't trust that data, it's going to produce outputs that can't be trusted as well. And then always having human in the loop. So the humans have to be the ones responsible for risk, quality, and relevance of what you're creating, and orchestrating the AI in the right direction in order to have the best output. So at this point, I want to acknowledge some very real objections that usually come up when we talk about data strategy, especially in fast-moving scientific or technical organizations. And oftentimes it's we're too early, we need to move fast. And the data strategy can help you reduce duplication, reduce rework. So while in the beginning, when you're starting your lab, it may seem like extra work, it can prevent a lot of extra work going down the line and ensure that everyone is aligned and moving in the right direction. So poor data practices will slow science more than standards do. And so, at a take home message, these are the three things I hope really resonated with people. So, data strategy is a company strategy, it's not an IT project. Data culture is really important, and we have to make sure that data integrity is everyone's responsibility. And people feel empowered in understanding their lanes and not uncertain about how they are part of this data strategy for the company. And then managing data with purpose, right? We have to be able to trust the context, be able to find the data that we're creating, ensuring that we are producing fair data. So what can you do today? So today you can think about, where are your bottlenecks? Where are those friction points? What are the places that we want to address moving forward? This week you might meet with your team and understand, are we using words in the same way? Do we have the right definitions in place? What are the pain points for each team? This month, you could start a data governance group, and this can really be started with anybody from the organization. Um, because you're going to bring in different people from across the company that you have. And this quarter, once you start establishing that data strategy and looking at how it's built with your business and scientific strategy, you can choose those one or two high value, fair use cases. With obviously the goal of this end product is to have fair aligned strategy involving everyone. And of course, to have a clean, optimized ELN and LIMS system. So that's sort of the end of the talk. If any of this resonates with you, I'd love to continue the conversation. Here's my website and my LinkedIn if you would like to connect. And again, if you have any pain points in this data strategy or in any other data aspects or need science communication work, I'd be happy to talk about projects in that lineup too. So I think we're going to open up for questions, but thank you all for coming, and thank you, SciNote, for hosting the webinar.
Thank you so much, Tess, for sharing a lot of your experience and knowledge with us. For all of our attendees, please feel free to drop any questions you may have in the Q&A or chat section. We do have, I think, one or two questions that I'll quickly address. So will the recording be shared? Yes, absolutely. So if you registered for the webinar, you'll receive a link to the recording. Tess is also going to be drafting sort of a little blog post or write-up on the topic today. So we'll also be sure to share that along with the recording. If you have any questions beyond that, you can reach out directly to SciNote. And if it's a question we can answer, we'll be happy to answer that. And if we need to loop Tess in, we can always direct the question her way as well. We have a few more minutes. Feel free to drop any questions that you may have. Oh, I see a second question. Are there any standards with implementation guides that can be a starting point? If you're referring to SciNote implementation, absolutely yes. What I can do is after this webinar, I can reach out to you directly with some follow-up questions. And depending on if it's SciNote related implementation or a data strategy implementation, either I'll respond to you with some material or I'll loop in Tess and have her provide some input there.
And I will say there's also lots of resources for data strategy implementation. A lot of them are not for biotech specifically. So there are specific things that biotech struggles with that maybe a larger company is not going to think about because it's not part of their business and strategy. And so while there are a lot of things out there to sort of help you get started, there are specific things with biotech we just have to be aware of that we're implementing to ensure that you have a data strategy that will work for biotech.
Okay, I see another question. Is it possible to link SciNote to an instrument so data is transferred automatically? Yes, it is possible using SciNote's Open API. So it's the short answer is yes, but there is also an it depends component. So if your instrument is being powered by a computer that has a software and the software has an Open API, then it's a matter of just connecting your instrument's API to SciNote's and you can automate the data transfer. If it doesn't, there are still ways to do it, but it would require a few more follow-up questions before I can give you the best path forward. So I can reach out to you directly after this webinar and get some more information, and I can provide you the guidance depending on that. Tess, I guess question for you. In your past experience, did you ever have any instruments connected to SciNote directly?
Sort of. So what we ended up doing, which included the SciNote API, is we had different instruments that were had their own computers producing data.
Mhm.
So that data was looked at by the scientist who was in charge of those instruments. That got uploaded to SciNote. We pulled it in through an API where it could be processed in the cloud, and then that data could be emailed back to the scientist for review before putting it back into SciNote. So it wasn't a fully automated process, but we wanted to ensure that we're keeping human in the loop
Yeah,
in each of the steps to ensure that data integrity.
awesome. Hopefully, that was helpful to the person asking the question. Thank you, Tess. But we have a couple more minutes for any last minute questions. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, we can wrap it up a couple minutes earlier. And like I said, the recording will be available to everyone that registered. Our team will be sending that out to you. Tess is also going to be writing up a nice little blog post on this. So I'll be sure that that blog post is also shared with you whenever it's ready. If you'd like to get in touch with SciNote, you can reach out to us directly. If you'd like to get in touch with Tess, her contact information is here. You can also reach out to me. I can provide you her contact information as well if needed. But with that being said, thank you everyone for your time. Tess, thank you again so much for sharing all this information with us.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure. And bye, everybody. Thanks for
Thanks
coming.
everyone. Bye bye.